You don't always see it coming. It's not the loud critics or open enemies that break you, it's the silent ones. The people who drain your energy, undermine your peace, and poison your mind drop by drop. You call them friends, family, co-workers, but slowly, quietly, they are destroying you. Stoic philosophy teaches you to master yourself, but it also teaches you to be ruthless in protecting your inner circle. Marcus Aurelius warned, "The tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say or think or do." In this video, you'll uncover the 10 types of people that the Stoics and modern psychology urge you to avoid, because peace isn't just found in solitude, it's found in clarity, knowing who to keep out. By the end, you'll see your relationships with sharper eyes and finally protect the calm you've been fighting so hard to build. Let's begin. Number 1, the hidden erosion, why some smiles are more dangerous than blades. The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Marcus Aurelius, you've been told to watch out for enemies, but no one ever warned you about the quiet destroyers, the people who smile when you speak but secretly hope you fall. You've likely met them. Some sit across from you at dinner, others linger at work, and a few might even wear the mask of friendship or love. They don't attack directly, they don't raise their voices, but they drain your strength in silence. They plant seeds of doubt, wrap you in guilt, or slowly make you forget who you are. And by the time you realize it, you've already been changed, your energy lower, your self-worth weaker, your clarity clouded. You feel off, but you can't name why. This is the erosion that Stoic philosophers like Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus warned against, not just the storms of fortune, but the subtle influences of people who infect your character. You carry emotional bruises they never touched you to leave. That old friend who always seemed to belittle your goals in the name of just being realistic. That partner who made you feel guilty for prioritizing your dreams. That coworker who masked envy as backhanded compliments. Their tactics aren't loud. They operate in the realm of micro wounds, small comments, passive looks, repeated patterns that feel like nothing in the moment but build into deep-rooted exhaustion over time. They don't attack your body, they infiltrate your mind. Stoicism teaches that you must guard your mind more fiercely than your home. Epictetus urged, if a person gave away your body to some passerby, you'd be furious. Yet you hand over your mind to anyone who comes along. So they may disturb you, leaving it troubled and confused. The question is, who are you letting walk freely into your inner world? Who gets to shape your identity, your emotions, your peace? Modern psychology now confirms what the Stoics intuited thousands of years ago. Relationships, especially emotionally manipulative ones, literally rewire your brain. Prolonged exposure to toxic dynamics can alter your nervous system, making you more anxious, more reactive, and less able to think clearly. Your sense of self-worth isn't an unshakable core, it's a garden, and the people around you are either nourishing its roots or pouring slow poison into its soil. Take the story of singer and actor Selena Gomez. At the height of her fame, she became entangled in a cycle of unhealthy relationships that drained her mentally and emotionally. For years, she struggled with anxiety, depression, and self-doubt, all while projecting an image of calm success. In interviews, she later spoke about realizing how some people in her life were subtly breaking her spirit. They weren't screaming at her. They were loving her in ways that clipped her wings. It wasn't until she stepped back, set hard boundaries, and began rebuilding from within that she started healing. Her journey wasn't just about walking away from others, it was about walking back to herself. That's the Stoic lesson you're invited to embrace, to become deeply selective about who has access to your soul. It doesn't require bitterness, it requires clarity. You don't need to confront everyone who hurts you. You need to stop giving them the keys to your peace. As Marcus Aurelius put it, you don't have to turn this into something. It doesn't have to upset you. You're allowed to feel the sting and still not be burned. You're allowed to see someone's behavior for what it is and choose distance without anger. Number 2, the subtle thief. Those who compete with your growth associate with people who are likely to improve you. Seneca, there's a certain kind of person who cheers for you in public but competes with you in private. You know the type. When you share a win, they nod politely, but their smile falters. When you dream out loud, they quickly one-up you or shift the spotlight. They might never say it directly, but their presence makes your growth feel like a threat rather than something to celebrate. This is the subtle thief of your spirit, the one who competes where they should collaborate, who envies where they should encourage, and often they hide in plain sight. Stoicism doesn't simply tell you to avoid people who openly mistreat you. It tells you to be watchful of those who poison the well of your progress with disguised resistance. Seneca warned that your associations shape your character, and you must choose them as carefully as you would choose your own thoughts. In his words, as long as you associate with a person who is mean and small, you cannot help becoming mean and small yourself. When someone is threatened by your elevation, they will attempt to pull you back, not always out of cruelty, but because your light casts a shadow on their own insecurities. Modern psychology supports this with a concept known as social comparison theory. It's the tendency of people to evaluate themselves in relation to others. For some, your growth becomes a mirror of what they haven't done, a painful reminder of the risks they didn't take or the dreams they abandoned. Instead of confronting their discomfort, they try to dim your light so they can feel whole again. And this doesn't always look like sabotage. Sometimes it's subtle withdrawal, a joke at your expense, a cold shoulder when you share good news. Over time, this creates an emotional environment where you feel guilty for succeeding. It's a dynamic that actor and entrepreneur Jessica Alba experienced early in her transition from Hollywood to founding The Honest Company. Many in her circle questioned her move into business, subtly suggesting she stay in her lane. At the time, the idea of a woman, especially a celebrity, entering the startup world wasn't taken seriously. But Jessica chose silence over defensiveness. She didn't argue with the critics. She quietly built something enduring. Later, she admitted that some of the most difficult resistance came not from strangers, but from peers who had once been close. Their doubts weren't about her, they were reflections of their own limitations. And that's the key insight. Their resistance wasn't personal, even though it felt that way. A Stoic knows not to respond to every jab with fire. You're not obligated to shrink yourself to fit someone else's comfort zone. You can outgrow people with grace, and you don't need to drag them with you. As you grow, not everyone will clap. That's not your burden to carry. Your task is to continue becoming, regardless of who feels threatened by the process. Epictetus taught that your duty is not to please others, but to live in harmony with nature, and growth is part of that nature. A tree doesn't apologize for getting taller, it simply reaches for the sun. So how do you navigate this in real life? Begin with awareness. Notice how you feel around certain people after you've shared a success or a dream. Do you feel expanded or constricted, uplifted or subtly dismissed? Emotional signals are often wiser than logical justifications. And when you sense this resistance, you don't need to argue. You can simply adjust the level of access. You can choose to share less with those who respond with competition rather than compassion. This isn't about punishment, it's about preservation. There's a simple Stoic practice that can guide you here: journaling. At the end of each day, reflect on who you encountered and how those interactions affected your state of mind. Were you more at peace or more anxious after being with them? Did their presence align with your values or challenge them in ways that felt draining rather than sharpening? Over time, patterns emerge, and from those patterns, you can make decisions that support your inner stability. You are not obligated to dim yourself for others to feel comfortable. The sun does not ask permission to rise. Your job is not to manage other people's insecurities, it's to guard your potential and surround yourself with those who water your roots, not compete with your branches. Because in the end, true friends don't feel threatened by your success, they feel inspired. And anyone who sees your growth as a loss in their ledger is not walking the same path. You can still love them from a distance, but don't slow down for someone who never planned to catch up. Number 3, the emotional storm. Those who drain your peace when you wake up in the morning. Tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. Marcus Aurelius, you've probably encountered them before, the emotional hurricanes. They enter your life like a sudden gust of wind, and every conversation with them leaves you feeling unsettled, agitated, or worse, hollowed out. Their problems are never-ending. Their complaints bottomless. They expect you to absorb their storms while offering nothing in return. And the worst part, they disguise it as vulnerability or just needing to vent. But what's really happening is far more dangerous to your inner life. They are slowly teaching you to abandon your peace to manage theirs. Stoicism teaches that peace is not found in the external world, but cultivated within. The moment you hand over your emotional climate to someone else's chaos, you lose control of your most precious possession, your mind. Marcus Aurelius reminds you that you cannot control the behavior of others, only your response to it. Yet in the presence of emotionally volatile people, that simple truth becomes hard to live. They tug at your empathy until it becomes a leash. What begins as compassion turns into codependency, and before you realize it, your own emotions are no longer your own. From a psychological standpoint, this phenomenon is deeply rooted in a trauma response known as fawning. When you've been conditioned, often from childhood, to earn safety or love by appeasing others, you may find yourself magnetized to people in distress. You jump to rescue them, explain away their moods, or overextend yourself just to keep the peace. But this isn't healing, it's self-abandonment disguised as kindness. And it erodes your emotional boundaries until you don't know where their pain ends and yours begins. Consider the example of tennis champion Naomi Osaka. At the height of her career, she made the bold decision to withdraw from major tournaments, citing mental health struggles. The public response was polarizing. Critics accused her of weakness. Even some within her professional circle were unsupportive, treating her emotional well-being as an inconvenience. But Naomi drew a line. She refused to be emotionally available to everyone at the expense of herself. In doing so, she reclaimed her peace not through avoidance but through honest boundaries. She didn't shame those who misunderstood her. She simply chose not to let their emotional turbulence dictate her life. That is a profoundly Stoic move, protecting the sanctuary of your inner citadel. The Stoics viewed peace not as avoidance of difficulty, but as the disciplined refusal to be enslaved by external events, including other people's moods. Epictetus put it this way: if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. This doesn't mean you become cold or uncaring. It means you stop letting others rent space in your head without paying the cost of mutual respect. Practically, how do you begin protecting your peace from emotional storms? First, create internal space before responding. When someone comes to you in a whirlwind of emotion, take a breath. Don't immediately absorb it or react. Ask yourself, is this truly mine to carry? Can I support them without losing myself? If the answer is no, it's not cruelty to step back, it's wisdom. You can say, I care about you, but I need to take care of my own mind right now. You don't owe constant availability to anyone. Next, practice emotional journaling. This is different from intellectual reflection. Instead of analyzing your day, write about how your body and mind responded to the people around you. Did someone leave you feeling anxious, heavy, or exhausted? That's a signal not of their evil, but of an energetic mismatch. Emotional fatigue is often a red flag that you're engaging with someone who's not managing their own pain responsibly. Finally, shift your definition of compassion. Compassion does not mean bleeding for others. It means being present with them without dissolving into their suffering. Just as a Stoic wouldn't panic when facing external turmoil, you shouldn't panic in the face of someone else's. Stand firm like a lighthouse in a storm. Shine steadily, but don't throw yourself into the waves. Number 4, the whisper of poison. Those who undermine you subtly avoid fraternizing with those who seek approval by tearing others down. The applause they offer comes with a dagger. Seneca, it's not the overt enemies who most often shake your confidence, it's the subtle ones. The people who smile with their mouths but wound with their tone. They praise you in public but plant doubt in private. They lace their words with comparison, condescension, or faint concern. Are you sure you can handle that? I mean, that's impressive, but don't get your hopes up. These aren't enemies in the traditional sense. They are saboteurs dressed as allies, and they are the most dangerous kind because they work quietly on your self-belief, not with a sword, but with a whisper. The Stoics knew this danger well. Seneca, who advised emperors and navigated the treacherous politics of imperial Rome, warned that flattery and subtle criticism are often two sides of the same coin. A person who must always position themselves above you, even in kindness, is not offering support, they are asserting control. They are not content with their own path unless it appears more illuminated than yours, and so they dim your light just slightly. Not enough to be noticed by everyone, just enough that you start to question whether you're truly glowing, psychologically. This is the realm of covert narcissism and emotional manipulation. People who operate this way often feel insecure in themselves. Instead of building their confidence through inner discipline, as the Stoics would advise, they build it by dismantling yours. It's a behavior rooted in scarcity thinking, the belief that your success takes something from them. And because their identity is fragile, they can't celebrate you without needing to feel superior in some way. You might notice they offer backhanded compliments, withdraw warmth when you do well, or highlight your flaws only when you're most vulnerable. These are not coincidences, they are calculated, even if unconsciously so. A vivid example of resisting such subtle sabotage comes from the life of Chadwick Boseman. When Boseman was first cast as the lead in major films, he was told to tone down certain character traits. Directors and producers suggested that his portrayal of strong, noble black characters might be too serious or too intense for mainstream audiences. These weren't overt rejections. They were subtle signals meant to guide him back into a more palatable version of himself, one that didn't challenge norms or make others uncomfortable. But Boseman refused. He carried the weight of his roles with dignity, understanding that his artistic choices reflected not just his talent, but his values. He didn't respond with anger. He simply stood firm in who he was, and in doing so, he reshaped the image of what a hero could look like. This is Stoicism in action. As Epictetus teaches, your role in life is not to shrink to make others feel secure. It is to walk your path with integrity, regardless of the reactions it stirs. If others feel threatened by your truth, that's their inner battle to fight. Your job is not to soften your excellence to fit their comfort zone. Your job is to be excellent anyway. So what do you do when you notice someone in your life planting quiet seeds of doubt? The first step is recognition. Don't gaslight yourself. Just because their tone is sweet doesn't mean their intentions are. Pay attention to how you feel after interacting with them. Do you walk away inspired or subtly diminished? Do you find yourself shrinking your dreams when they are around just to keep the peace? Next, practice what the Stoics called ataraxia, tranquility of mind. Instead of reacting to every slight, every dig, pause, ask yourself, is this comment a reflection of truth or their insecurity? You'll often find the answer in how much it mirrors your own fears. If it pokes at a wound you haven't healed, it may feel powerful. But that is your invitation to heal, not to hide. You also have the right and responsibility to set clear emotional boundaries. You can say with calm strength, I've noticed that comments like that don't really help me. I'd prefer if we focus on solutions or encouragement. You don't have to accuse, but you must be firm, because the cost of tolerating subtle undermining is a gradual erosion of self-worth, and you're too valuable to bleed out in silence. And finally, ground yourself in community that reflects your worth. Seneca often wrote that a wise person chooses companions who make virtue easier. Surround yourself with those who challenge you to grow, not those who compete to keep you small. Your energy is precious. Don't waste it deciphering the motives of those who speak in riddles of passive aggression. Number 5, the storm bringer, those addicted to chaos. If a person gave away your body to some passerby, you'd be furious. Yet you hand over your mind to anyone who insults you, confuses you, or drags you into drama. Epictetus, you've met them, you've let them in, and they've drained your peace with the force of 1,000 little storms. These are the people who thrive in chaos, who manufacture conflict not because they are evil, but because it feels like home to them. And they are addicted to the emotional turbulence of life, not because it brings them clarity, but because stillness terrifies them. When things get too calm, they kick the hornet's nest just to prove they are still alive. Stoic philosophy warns you not just to avoid suffering, but to avoid unnecessary suffering. And nothing is more unnecessary than being pulled into someone else's emotional whirlpool. Marcus Aurelius put it simply, you always own the option of having no opinion. There is never a need to get worked up or to trouble your soul. And yet these people invite you, seduce you into their hurricanes. They call you at midnight with their latest emergency. They start arguments over misunderstandings they've rehearsed in their own heads. They gossip, provoke, and pick fights with the world, and then expect you to be their life raft, psychologically. This behavior often stems from unresolved trauma. People who grow up in volatile environments sometimes internalize chaos as a survival strategy. If peace was never safe for them, they may unconsciously recreate drama as a way to feel in control. It's not always conscious manipulation, often it's emotional conditioning. But the effect on you is the same. You're left anxious, off-center, and exhausted, wondering why your own sense of inner stability always seems to collapse around them. Take the example of singer Amy Winehouse, a brilliant artist with a voice that could melt stone. Amy surrounded herself with individuals who were equally self-destructive, feeding on the same kind of emotional chaos that haunted her. Her relationships were turbulent, filled with explosive fights, codependency, and substance abuse. Despite her immense talent, she struggled to rise above the constant storm of her surroundings. The tragedy wasn't just her downfall, it was how much brilliance was lost to the chaos she couldn't escape. Amy's story is not one of weakness, but of the painful truth that talent and potential mean little when you're perpetually drowning in other people's emotional debris. The Stoics urge you to preserve your inner fortress, and one way to do this is to ask yourself a powerful question: is this mine to carry? When someone comes to you with drama, pain, or perpetual crises, pause. Is this truly your responsibility, or are you being pulled into a fire you didn't start? Compassion does not mean codependence. You can care without getting consumed. To apply this practically, begin by observing your reactions. Who in your life makes your chest tighten when their name lights up your phone? Who turns small misunderstandings into existential arguments? These aren't people to judge, but they are people to keep at a safe emotional distance. Boundaries are not punishments, they're acts of wisdom. Epictetus spoke often about the things within your control, and other people's moods, reactions, and life patterns are not among them. You can support someone, listen to them, even help them, but you cannot save them from themselves. When you try, you drown beside them, and then neither of you is free. The modern psychological approach echoes this Stoic wisdom. Therapists working with emotionally volatile relationships often stress the importance of detachment with love, a strategy where you stay grounded in empathy without becoming entangled in dysfunction. You learn to say things like, "I care about you, but I can't join you in this crisis," or "I see you're hurting and I trust you to handle this." These statements don't abandon the person, they simply honor your limits. You must also be honest about what parts of yourself are drawn to chaos. Do you feel needed when someone else is falling apart? Does fixing others make you feel valuable? The Stoics would remind you your worth is not measured by how much suffering you absorb, but by how much peace you can sustain. It is not cruel to protect your inner peace. It is courageous, because walking away from chaos, especially when it comes dressed as love, loyalty, or friendship, is one of the hardest things you'll ever do, but it's also one of the most necessary. Your mind is a sacred space. Not everyone deserves access to it, especially not those who bring storms and then blame you for the rain. Number 6, the spotlight thieves, those who can't celebrate your growth when you rise in rank or fortune. You will find that those closest to you are often the ones who grow cold. Seneca, there's a subtle kind of betrayal that doesn't come with slander or sabotage. It comes with silence, with the withheld congratulations, with the backhanded compliments that sting more than open criticism. You'll recognize it when you've worked hard for something, a promotion, a relationship, a personal breakthrough, and someone you thought would be happy for you isn't. This is the pain of being around people who cannot celebrate your growth, who, instead of clapping for you, shrink away or shift the conversation. Stoicism calls for resilience in the face of envy, but it also calls for discernment in the face of emotional truth. Because sometimes the people you most want to impress are the ones most invested in your staying small. You might assume such people are just mean or insecure, but it's deeper than that. Modern psychology sheds light on this behavior as a defensive response to perceived threat. Your success challenges their self-concept. When you grow, evolve, and elevate, it forces them to confront their own stagnation. Instead of looking inward, they look at you and resent you for shining a light on what they haven't done. This doesn't make them villains, it makes them human. But it also makes them dangerous to your spirit if you're not aware. You've likely heard of the crab in a bucket metaphor. Put one crab in a bucket and it may climb out. Put several together and the others will pull it back down, not out of malice but instinct, a need to maintain the status quo. This happens in families, friend groups, even professional circles. You say you're starting a business, they say that's risky. You say you're in therapy, they say you're overthinking. You say you're happier now, they go silent. Take the story of Brené Brown, the renowned researcher and author known for her work on vulnerability and courage. When she first began speaking publicly about shame and emotional exposure, even some close friends and colleagues doubted her. They weren't openly hostile, but there was a subtle coolness, as if her stepping fully into her purpose made them uncomfortable. Over time, she came to understand that not everyone has the emotional capacity to witness your transformation without comparing it to their own inertia. Some are afraid that your light will expose their shadows, but Stoicism teaches you this: another person's discomfort is not your burden. Marcus Aurelius wrote, the opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject. In other words, you don't need universal approval to live in alignment with your values. And if your growth causes friction, that friction is often revealing. It tells you who was rooting for your potential and who was only comfortable with your past. The Stoics were clear: your only true obligation is to your own virtue, not to the comfort of others, not to the emotional balance of people who see your progress as a threat. Your task is to keep growing, regardless of who claps, because that is the path to eudaimonia, the deep fulfillment that comes from living with purpose and excellence. Practically, this means you need to notice how people respond to your wins. Do they ask questions with genuine interest? Do they celebrate with you even in small ways? Or do they deflect, downplay, or suddenly become unavailable? Again, this isn't about judgment, it's about clarity. Because you can only grow into your next level if you're not shrinking yourself to stay digestible to others. This is where the Stoic muscle of apatheia, not apathy, but emotional equanimity, becomes essential. When someone withholds support or reacts with envy, your task is not to retaliate or even explain yourself. It is to remain anchored. You simply keep moving forward without bitterness, without theatrical exits, and without apology. So keep rising. Not in arrogance, but in quiet, steady strength. Celebrate your wins even if it's just you in the room. Trust that every step forward sheds what is no longer aligned. And know this: the ones who truly love you will not compete with your light. They'll reflect it, expand it, and help it grow. Number 7, the chaos dealers, those who thrive on drama and conflict. Whenever you are about to find fault with someone, ask yourself the following question: what fault of mine most nearly resembles the one I am about to criticize? Marcus Aurelius: there's a peculiar kind of person who always seems to carry a storm cloud above their head. Wherever they go, turbulence follows. Arguments seem to cling to them like static. Peace wilts in their presence. These are the chaos dealers, people who, whether intentionally or unconsciously, thrive on drama, instability, and emotional escalation. And if you're not careful, they will slowly unravel your calm, infect your mental clarity, and erode your emotional equilibrium. Stoicism is a philosophy of inner stillness. Its entire premise is that peace is not given to you by the world, it's built inside you by the choices you make and the company you keep. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that people would be meddling, jealous, arrogant, dishonest, and that none of this should disturb his mind. Why? Because his peace was his responsibility. And yet what he understood, and what you must understand, is that being prepared for chaos is not the same as welcoming it. Chaos dealers are not just loud, they're emotionally volatile, addicted to attention, and constantly surrounded by some form of interpersonal crisis. Their relationships are dramatic, their complaints are constant, their energy is restless, and they don't rest until they pull you into their whirlpool. They might call it passion or authenticity, but often it's unresolved trauma looking for a stage. Modern psychology has a name for this pattern: high-conflict personality traits. These individuals often escalate minor disagreements into major conflicts. They struggle with emotional regulation and are quick to assign blame to others. They may even mistake confrontation for connection, believing that intensity equals intimacy. But here's the danger: if you're a naturally empathetic person, you're a prime target for this energy. You'll feel pulled to soothe them, reason with them, fix things, and before long their instability becomes your baseline. One high-profile example of this dynamic comes from the music industry: the long, volatile relationship between Britney Spears and her early management team. While details vary depending on perspective, it's clear that she was surrounded for years by people who profited from her emotional distress, who amplified conflict, and who blurred the lines between concern and control. In environments like that, where chaos becomes normalized, clarity disappears. Personal sovereignty erodes, and healing becomes impossible. That's why the Stoics emphasized the need to choose your environment with intention. Seneca wrote that we become like those we spend time with, that the soul takes the color of its company. He wasn't being poetic, he was being brutally realistic. Your nervous system responds to your surroundings. Spend enough time around volatile, reactive people, and you'll either become reactive yourself or you'll suppress your truth just to maintain a shred of peace. Neither is healthy. Neither leads to virtue, so what's the Stoic path forward? First, recognition. You must be able to spot the signs of a chaos dealer early, the friend who always has a new enemy, the co-worker who gossips endlessly, the family member who turns every disagreement into a battlefield. Watch not only what they say, but what they cause in you. Do you feel more drained after talking to them? More anxious, more irritable, less grounded? These aren't just feelings, they're data. They're your mind and body telling you that something is off. Second, detach with calm. Not with cruelty, not with superiority, but with clarity. You don't have to fix them. You don't even have to explain yourself. You simply stop feeding the fire. Don't react, don't argue, don't play the role they've scripted for you. This is what Epictetus meant when he said, "It's not things that disturb us, but our judgments about things." You don't have to let their storm become your storm. And finally, rebuild your space. Curate your relationships like you curate your thoughts, carefully, deliberately, with respect for your own inner sanctuary. Seek out those who prefer depth over drama, those who solve problems rather than create them. Those whose idea of connection is rooted in presence, not provocation. Because here's the truth: calm is rare, serenity is revolutionary. In a world addicted to outrage and performance, your peace is both your protest and your protection. So guard it, cultivate it, and when chaos comes knocking, as it always will, let it find the door to your mind firmly closed. Number 8, the credit thieves. Those who diminish your worth for their gain don't explain your philosophy, embody it. Epictetus, there's a unique kind of betrayal that doesn't come with shouting or slander. It's quieter, more insidious. It happens when someone takes your work, your ideas, your contributions, and claims them as their own. These are the credit thieves. People who quietly extract value from you while making sure they are the ones standing in the spotlight. And the most dangerous part, they often smile while doing it. Stoicism teaches that you should never depend on external praise to define your worth. The applause of others is fleeting, and public opinion is as unstable as the weather. Still, that doesn't mean you must tolerate being robbed of your dignity or recognition. There's a difference between humility and passivity, between accepting what you cannot control and failing to act on what you can. Credit thieves live off others' efforts. They are often driven by deep insecurity, masked by arrogance. In modern psychology, this behavior aligns with covert narcissism, a tendency to inflate one's image while quietly undermining others. These people don't confront you directly. They don't argue. Instead, they maneuver. They plant seeds of doubt about your competence, subtly insert themselves into your achievements, and reshape narratives to make themselves appear indispensable. You may have encountered them at work, the manager who presents your report as if it were their brainchild, the colleague who echoes your ideas in meetings without acknowledgement, or the friend who retells your story, casting themselves as the hero. And when it happens repeatedly, it chips away at your sense of agency. You start questioning yourself. Am I overreacting? Maybe I wasn't that important to the project. Maybe I'm just being sensitive. But that's exactly the trap. Credit thieves thrive when your self-worth is tied to their recognition. They weaponize your humility against you. Stoicism, however, offers a different kind of defense, not loud retaliation, but solid self-possession. Epictetus didn't teach people to boast or beg for validation. He taught them to know themselves so deeply that no amount of distortion from others could cloud their reality. Take, for example, Rosalind Franklin, the brilliant scientist whose work was central to the discovery of DNA's structure. While James Watson and Francis Crick received the lion's share of credit and eventually the Nobel Prize, Franklin's critical X-ray diffraction images were not properly acknowledged in her lifetime. Yet Franklin never stopped working, never descended into bitterness. Her legacy wasn't shaped by those who ignored her. It was preserved by the integrity of her contributions and eventually vindicated by history. This is the Stoic lesson. Recognition may be delayed or denied, but virtue cannot be stolen. What is truly yours, the discipline, the effort, the clarity of your thinking, remains yours regardless of how it's framed by others. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." The credit thief seeks validation through deception. You find peace through authenticity. Still, how do you deal with such people in practice? First, don't allow their behavior to push you into resentment. That only gives them more power. Bitterness corrodes the vessel that contains it. Instead, document your work. Keep quiet receipts, not out of vanity, but for your own clarity. Knowing your own contributions grounds you in truth, which is essential when others try to distort it. Second, build alliances based on transparency. Credit thieves operate best in the shadows. Bring your work into the light, share your ideas openly, attribute generously, and surround yourself with those who do the same. This creates an ecosystem where integrity is rewarded and dishonesty becomes more obvious. Finally, protect your energy. If you cannot remove yourself from the credit thief's orbit, then emotionally detach. Let your standard be your own measure, not theirs. Remember Seneca's wisdom. A good character, when established, is not easily overthrown. You're not here to compete in a game of appearances. You're here to live by principle. You may not always get the credit you deserve, but you can always act in a way that deserves it. And over time, that becomes the greater power, not applause, but self-respect. Not external trophies, but internal peace. Because when the spotlight fades and the applause dies down, what remains is the substance of your life. So hold fast to your values, keep showing up, keep doing the work, and let the credit thieves chase shadows while you remain anchored in what is real. Number 9, the masters of chaos, those who thrive in conflict and confusion. If someone can prove me wrong and show me my mistake in any thought or action, I shall gladly change. I seek the truth, which never harmed anyone. The harm is to persist in one's own self-deception and ignorance. Marcus Aurelius, there are people who are addicted to turbulence, not in the external world, but in their relationships. These individuals don't just stir the waters of your peace. They live in the storm, they inject confusion, pit people against each other, and thrive in the emotional fog that chaos creates. You may know them by their trail, misunderstandings wherever they go, unresolved tensions in every group they enter, and a cycle of crisis that seems to reset the moment things begin to calm. The Stoics warned us about these kinds of individuals, not by name but by behavior. They are the people Marcus Aurelius might have been thinking of when he reminded himself each morning that he would inevitably meet the meddling, the arrogant, the deceitful. What mattered, he said, was how he responded. But this was not a call to blind tolerance. It was a call to discernment. Psychologically, chaos-seeking individuals often carry unresolved trauma and lack the tools to experience peace without discomfort. Calmness threatens their internal instability. For them, quiet means confronting themselves, and that's a confrontation they'll do anything to avoid. So instead, they drag others into conflict. They ask questions not to understand, but to provoke. They triangulate, gossip, spread half-truths, and make themselves the center of every dispute. You might recognize this pattern in someone close to you, a coworker who always seems to be in the middle of workplace drama, a friend who creates tension among others. Then steps back and plays the peacekeeper. At first, you may feel compelled to help them, to soothe them, to bring order to their disorder. But over time, your emotional resources dwindle. You start waking up with tension in your chest, checking your messages with dread, wondering what the next fire will be. That's how chaos spreads, not with loud explosions, but through constant, draining friction. The Stoic response is not to fight fire with fire, nor to absorb it passively, but to maintain the clarity of your inner citadel. You protect your boundaries not by raising your voice, but by raising your standards. You stop engaging in drama disguised as conversation. You don't match their emotional volatility. You become the still water that reflects but doesn't ripple. Consider the story of Fred Rogers, yes, Mr. Rogers, as a modern example of someone who refused to participate in chaos. In the midst of a television world driven by noise, sensationalism, and aggressive personalities, Fred Rogers built his program on slowness, simplicity, and genuine emotional connection. He didn't allow others to define the pace or the tone of his message, and by doing so, he became a sanctuary for millions. You don't need to be a public figure to apply this. In fact, you'll likely be tested in more private spaces, at your dinner table, in a group chat, in a team meeting. And the first step is to stop reacting to emotional bait. Chaos seekers want you on the defensive, off balance, but a Stoic remains rooted. Before you respond, pause, ask, is this mine to carry? Is this response about truth or just noise? Then choose silence or firm kindness or even distance, whatever aligns with your principles. Seneca reminds us we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Often, the chaos someone brings into your life feels unbearable because you imagine it will never end. But you can end it not by changing them, but by refusing to be drawn into their storm. Let them spin, let them seek conflict. You, however, can remain calm, not out of detachment, but out of wisdom. The practical path forward is this: minimize contact with those who breed instability. If you must interact with them, stay neutral, clear, and emotionally contained. Don't let their urgency become your agenda. Schedule recovery time after interactions, and cultivate relationships with those who foster harmony, not havoc. Your peace is too precious to be outsourced to those who wouldn't know what to do with it anyway. You didn't come this far in your emotional growth just to be dragged backward by someone who can't sit quietly with themselves. Choose clarity over confusion, truth over gossip, stillness over storms. Because real strength, the kind Stoicism champions, isn't found in how loudly you fight chaos, but in how completely you refuse to live in it. Number 10, the masked manipulator. Those who use kindness as currency don't trust the person who is nice to everyone. Kindness that expects repayment is not kindness, it's calculation. Adapted from Epictetus, there's a peculiar kind of danger that doesn't show up with a scowl, but with a smile. You've met them before, the ones who offer help unsolicited, flatter you a little too easily, give gifts or praise that feel a shade too tailored. At first, it feels like warmth, maybe even support, but soon their generosity comes with a cost. Their kindness begins to feel transactional, and when you don't pay back the favor, at least not in the way they hoped, you're met with passive aggression, guilt, or worse, betrayal. These are the masked manipulators, people who weaponize kindness for control. Stoicism teaches that virtue should be its own reward. Seneca said, a benefit should be kept like a buried treasure, only to be dug up in necessity. That is, true kindness asks for nothing in return. It is given because it is right, not because it is useful. But manipulators do not give from virtue, they give from strategy. Their support is not free, it's a quiet investment in your future compliance. Psychologically, this type of behavior stems from unmet needs for validation and control. Manipulators often learned early in life that direct demands were punished or ignored. So they developed subtler strategies. They became pleasers, not out of genuine care, but out of fear of rejection or the need to secure advantage. Their smiles hide resentment. Their helpfulness comes with a hidden ledger, and the moment you step out of line, they cash in that emotional debt. You may have experienced this in a personal relationship, a partner who showers you with affection but later uses it to shame you for independence. Or in a professional setting, a colleague who has your back only to expect your loyalty when they bend the rules. At first, the arrangement feels safe, even beneficial, but over time you feel cornered. You find yourself walking on eggshells, afraid to disappoint someone who's been so good to you. That isn't kindness, it's emotional blackmail. The Stoic path calls you to detect these dynamics early, before they entangle your judgment. Marcus Aurelius taught that the best way to protect your inner peace is to be honest with yourself about the motives of others, not paranoid but perceptive. You don't need to assume malice, but you do need to observe patterns. If someone gives but always expects praise, loyalty, or control in return, then what they offer is not a gift, it's a leash. Take the example of Anthony Bourdain. In his career, Bourdain often refused to play the Hollywood game. He spoke honestly, traveled humbly, and stayed skeptical of those who came with charm but hidden agendas. He surrounded himself with real people, chefs, travelers, workers, those who gave without strings attached. His ability to see through performative kindness allowed him to connect deeply without being controlled. Your own application starts with clarity. Notice how people respond when you say no. That's the quickest test. If someone's warmth turns cold when you assert boundaries, their kindness wasn't real, it was a contract. Next, practice giving and receiving without keeping score. When you help others, let it be final. Don't wait for applause, and when someone helps you, thank them but stay free. If you sense manipulation in a relationship, shift the dynamic, reduce dependency, stop over-explaining, don't apologize for not reciprocating someone's hidden agenda. You're not ungrateful, you're self-aware. Your duty is to virtue, not appeasement. In the end, Stoicism reminds you, be wary of kindness that costs too much. The most dangerous chains are the ones disguised as bracelets. Don't let gratitude become a prison. You can appreciate generosity without becoming indebted to it. Real strength lies in discernment, in knowing when help is genuine and when it's bait. Trust those who give with open hands, not closed expectations. Give freely, receive gratefully, but always remain free. Choose inner peace over outer chaos as you reflect on the 11 people who quietly drain your peace. Remember this timeless insight from Marcus Aurelius. The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts, not on who praises you, not on who betrays you, not on the chaos swirling around you. Your power lies in where you direct your attention, your boundaries, and your values. You don't need to fix or fight these types of people. Your task is simpler, but harder. Choose clarity over confusion, self-respect over guilt, and stillness over emotional entanglement. Stoicism doesn't ask you to be cold or distant, it asks you to be centered. It's a compass, not armor. Now look at your own life. Who silently undermines your peace? Who makes you doubt your worth, second-guess your truth, or betray your values? Begin today with one decision: to step back, to observe without reacting, and to protect the sanctuary of your mind. If this message resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. How have you handled difficult people in your own journey? And if you found this helpful, consider subscribing to Unshakable Calm, where we turn ancient wisdom into modern strength.